There's like, okay.
Do you know of any body of knowledge about how the well-meaning environment of the child is actually supporting the alienation? For example, the school is there only to teach the child, but they are not going to get involved in anything outside of it. The coach is not going to get involved in this, and it's okay with him that only one parent brings the child, and the teachers don't want to deal
Right.
with this. And the entire society around the child really echoes the alienating parent strategy.
Right. I agree. There's a lot of people who bear witness to this and don't step forward to say, wait a minute, kid, I've seen you with your mom. What's the deal? Now you won't even look at her? That's rude behavior. I agree. We need to educate, and certainly the schools is a great way to start. But right now, I think there's a lot of people who either say, well, if the kid likes that parent, that parent must be okay, or I just don't want to get involved.
They don't even want to engage in dealing with your workshop about not having to choose. They're afraid of it. And I tried.
Well, if anybody has ideas about how to, get the word out, I'm sure Joe would be interested too. I mean, that's part of what the point of this conference is, in a way, is to educate more and more professionals. Okay, there's so many questions. I don't know how to deal with this. Do you have any? Anybody have any?
At the end.
Okay, we'll do the questions at the end. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll save time at the end. And maybe, can you come up and call on people? Because for us, it's me. Anybody. Somebody comes up and makes the decision. I don't want to do it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the criticism. Okay, so one is that PAS is not in the DSM, so it doesn't exist, right? We might be beating a dead horse with the whole DSM thing, but I just want to point out a couple things. The first is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association is not the Bible. Just in case you thought it was actually the Bible, it's not. It is very much an evolving process. Every 25 years, it's revised. The current version, which is 4R, it will ultimately turn into 5, but between 4R and 5, it will be about 25 years. 25 years ago, when they were doing the last round of revisions, as far as I know, nobody even put in a proposal for PAS to be accepted. So it just really rankles me when people say, well, it's not in the DSM, so it can't exist. That just doesn't make sense. What this slide shows you is that there was a great deal of variation in receptivity to new diagnoses from one version of the DSM to the next. So Robert Spitzer was in charge of taking it from version 2 to version 3. And as you can see, about 100 new diagnoses got in. There was a joke, Bob Spitzer never met a diagnosis he didn't like. There are stories of him literally in an elevator being sort of cornered by people going, okay, all right, we'll put that in. And then when it went from 3 to 3R, somebody else took over the process, Alan Francis, and he said nothing controversial's getting in. Basically no new diagnoses. And you can see only 5 went in from 3R to 4. Now, I don't know how many new ones are going to get in now from 4 to 5. But the current chair of the task force said the DSM is a hard club to get into. So we have to not take it personally. There's just a lot of forces at work. I'm sure everybody knows homosexuality used to be in the DSM, and it got taken out, not necessarily because there was any new science or scientific breakthrough. It's because homosexual psychiatrists cornered, I think it was Bob Spitzer at one of the conventions, and said, this has got to come out. This is bias, and we don't like it, and get rid of it. And he got rid of it. So there's forces at work to keep it in, there's to put it in, there's forces to keep it out. It's not all about the science. That's my main point there. There are other controversies as well. Some people say, well, when children choose sides, they always choose the better parent. Don't you wish? Don't you just wish? I mean, man, we could all go home, right? And I just want to say, like, really? You really think kids make good choices? And why do we have all those, like, drug resistance programs in the school, or gangs and peer pressure? And Why do we make kids wear helmets? Why do we have laws about that? Because they wouldn't wear them otherwise, right? Kids don't always make the right choice. There's a whole argument that PAS harms women and is a tool for abusive fathers to gain custody. I don't even know how to get into this, but I'll just say that I was debating Peter Jaffe not that long ago. He was a representative of the domestic violence industry, orientation services, and he said PAS should not be in the DSM because then battered women will be told, don't get a restraining order, don't make a claim of domestic violence because your battering spouse, partner, will claim it's alienation and take your kids away from you. And I said, Peter, the way to protect these women is to have PAS in the DSM so we know what the criteria are. And then a battered woman could say, oh yeah, you think I'm alienating my kid? Does he have a campaign of denigration? No. Is he using weak, frivolous, and absurd reasons? No. Got the independent thinker phenomenon, borrowed scenarios, da-da-da-da-da? No. The way to protect is to have an accurate consensus diagnosis. That's my belief anyway. Pardon? Oh, good, okay. Bring it on. Okay. Gardner himself, unfortunately, I'm sure I don't have to tell you, has been reviled. He has been a lightning rod for the parties that object to this concept. He didn't really work at the university. He was a hired gun. It's just nonsense. And who cares if he worked at Columbia University? That would not, nothing you could tell me about Richard Gardner, none of the bad things do I believe. But even if they were true, that would not discredit the theory. And then there are the people who say, well, PAS is widely discredited. And it's like, okay, so, tell me about that. And then you go on the internet and you find an article that cites a bunch of other things that are unpublished and mistaken, and it's sort of a house of cards, the whole idea that PAS is widely discredited. So I'm sure you've heard I don't know if you know that Paul Fink, the former president of the American Psychiatric Association, but you probably are familiar with his phrase, PAS is the worst kind of junk science, right? Or PAS is junk science. We can thank him for that. But actually, recently, he wrote in the Clinical Psychiatry News in May of 2010 that, of course, PAS exists. But I bet you that the PAS junk science phrase will continue to live on, and his little retraction of it might not get as much attention as we would like. So there just isn't a lot of credibility to many of these controversies and many of these criticisms. Right? That doesn't mean we know everything there is to know. But it means that the people who say there's no research, or it's junk, it doesn't exist, it never happens, I believe that they're wrong. Okay. Now I want to shift gears again and talk a little bit about my research with the adult children of parental alienation syndrome. Much of this is in the book, so if you read the book, sorry, I'll be repeating it. When I started getting interested in this topic, and I knew that I wanted to do some research, I started poking around a little bit. I joined a couple support groups online, not posing. I came on as myself. And I pretty quickly figured out what I thought the burning question in the field was at that time. And from the targeted parents' perspective, what they want to know is, will I ever get my child back? I've lost my child won't talk to me, it's been 6 months, 6 years, whatever it's been. Are they ever going to figure it out? That's what they want to know. How long, if you just tell me they're going to come back, I can hang on and I can wait. But I just want to know that they're going to come back, that some of these kids figure it out and come back. And then they wanted to know, if some of these kids have the realization, what's the catalyst? Because I want to make that happen faster. Can I speed it up? And then I think what they want to know is, what has this done to my child? My child has been manipulated, turned against me. What is this going to do to his or her character for the rest of his or her life? So those were the 3 questions that guided my research. Did these kids ever figure it out? What's the catalyst for that realization? And what do they perceive the long-term effects to be? So I'm not going to go into any of the methods of my study, but I found 40 people. It took very little time. I mean, and that was sort of the first finding I had was, oh yeah, there are people out there who say, yes, when I was a child, one of my parents turned me against the other parent. Because those are the people I wanted to talk to so that I could ask them, well, how long did it take? And what was the catalyst? And what did that alienating parent do? And so it took me a matter of months, weeks, I don't remember, but it certainly wasn't a year. And actually one of my favorite stories is, I believe it was Lorna, I gave a flyer for my project. It said, when you were a child and one of your parents turned you against the other parent, and would you like to participate in a research study? And I gave a bunch of flyers to people, and I posted notices on the internet, and Lorna was going to a conference, so I gave some to her to pass out. Maybe she would know somebody who fit the bill, and she was sitting on the airplane, right, on her way to the conference, and the man sitting next to her, and she's looking at the flyer, and the man sitting next to her says, that happened to me. So that's how easy it was to find people, all right? Okay, so I'm going to zip through some of these findings, okay? And then I'm going to talk about advice for targeted parents, and then I'm going to talk about my program for kids. So the first one is, and we now know this, but this seems sort of new at the time, that PAS is not just the purview of bitter ex-wives turning the kids against the father. That was the prototype. That's what Richard Gardner first talked about, although later he did say dads do this too. I think he even said it's probably 50-50, but in the beginning, he did see it as something that women were doing. And what I found in my research was fathers can be alienating parents, non-custodial parents can be alienating parents, all right? You don't have to have custody to do it. You just need to have access, some amount of time, and I don't know how much time, but just some amount of time, and then you can do it. And that this also occurs in intact families. And this is, of course, not a surprise to people who follow family systems theory, because they talked about this all the time, all right? But it's so important because until we get this message out there, anybody who doesn't fall into the prototype, so let's say it's a mom who thinks her kids are being turned against her, or a custodial parent who thinks the kids are being turned against that parent, they're going to go to a therapist and say, you know, I think maybe this alienation thing, I think I read about it, and the therapist has said, oh no, that can't be parental alienation, that's just what mothers do. So we definitely need to make it clear that that might be one prototype, one paradigm, but there are others. Okay, this is another finding. The alienation was not fully internalized. And by that I mean these kids, the people I interviewed, said, I treated my father like he was a dog. I told him, I hate you, drop dead, I never want to see you again, don't darken my doorway, blah, blah, blah. But inside, I didn't really totally mean it. All right, and this is so important for parents who are going through this, because all you're getting as the targeted parent is the drop dead, I hate you message. And so I'm here to tell you that inside your nasty, horrible, rude, disgusting, arrogant, entitled child is a child who still loves you and needs you. And these kids don't want to be painted in a corner, and they don't want to be given the power to reject the other parent. They want to be forced to have a relationship with the parent they're rejecting. Okay, here's another finding. It's also obvious, but there's a little bit to it here. Obviously, there's loss involved with PAS, right? The child is giving up a relationship with the parent, and the parent is losing a child, a beloved child, and short of the death of a child, this is the worst thing that can happen to a parent. I'm convinced of that. This is heartache upon heartache upon heartache. But the extended family also experiences a loss. I get phone calls from grandmothers and aunts and uncles all the time. Their hearts are broken. They'd say, I saw my grandchild every, Sunday for 6 years, and now they won't even, accept a card or a gift I'm sending to them. So I think of it as sort of the pebble in the pond with the ripples, right? There's just loss upon loss. You know, I say, and I've had this experience where I tell total strangers what I do, and if there's 10 people in the room, probably 5 of them have some intersection with this issue. They might not be targeted parents, all of them, but maybe their brother's a targeted parent, and their neighbor's going through this, and it affects a vast number of people. But there's another kind of loss, too, because the child loses a piece of himself or herself. They have to cut off and bury whatever good memories they have of the targeted parent, whatever doubts they have, because they're not allowed to doubt the alienating parent. They have to believe everything that parent's saying. So any seeds of doubt they have to cut off and put away. They can't admit that they're afraid of that parent and they're afraid of losing that parent. And any way in which they're like the targeted parent, they might look like that parent, they might have the same hobby as that parent, they might be grumpy in the morning like that parent, whatever it is, they have to separate from that characteristic. And so I'll just give you 2 examples. One of the people I interviewed said that when her mother was mad at her, she called her the name of her aunt, who was the sister of the targeted parent. And that was a derogatory term. That was not an affectionate endearment term, right? And what did this girl do? Oh, and what the mother said was, you have big sticking out ears like your Tia, like your aunt. And so now I'm hoping with Obama and the big ears, you know, we can sort of put that away. But anyway, for this girl who didn't know about Obama having big ears, that was a horrible thing to have big ears like her aunt. That was her mother's way of saying, you're not a part of me, you're not a part of my family, I don't accept you. And so what did this girl do? She glued her ears to her head. Now, I was giving this talk to people once who did not come to a PAS conference. They were mental health professionals who were taking a year-long class, and they had no idea what the content of the course would be, and I come in 1 week to give a special lecture on parental alienation. And I'm giving the talk, and I get to this point, and a man in the audience, and there was only 20 people there in the audience, says to me, oh, maybe that's why I've had plastic surgery my whole life. I felt compelled to change my look so that I wouldn't look like my Puerto Rican father. And my mother was Irish, and she always made fun of me that I looked like my dad, who I have no relationship with and never saw and talked to. And he had no idea why he felt compelled to have plastic surgery. All right? So that's the kind of loss I'm talking about. You lose a piece of yourself when you're an alienated child. Okay? I was sort of surprised, but now that I've been in this field for a while, this will come as no surprise. The better parent, the favored parent that these kids are allying themselves with, many of them were physically and or sexually abusing these kids. So one of the people I interviewed, her mother died in childbirth, her father couldn't take care of her, so this was a bit of a twist on the situation. So the dad asked his sister, who became the alienating parent, could you raise this child, because he also had 4 other kids that he was dealing with and the loss of his wife and their mother. And so he asked his sister, and this dad also had a traveling job, could you please watch this baby for a little while I get my head together? I just lost my kid and I've got 4 other kids to deal with. This aunt who called herself Mommy, and her husband, who was the uncle, who called himself Daddy, raised this child and would not give this child back to the father, who got a new job, didn't require traveling. He was ready to raise his kid. So this girl was being physically and sexually abused by both the aunt and the uncle, who she called Mommy and Daddy. And so I asked her, and her dad would come and visit with her, and he wanted to take her home. And the girl would not go. And I said, well, how come? And she said, I didn't want her to be upset or angry with me. All right, that's how powerful the alienating parents are. Okay, so here's another finding, that alienating parents function like cult leaders. They use many of the same emotional manipulation and thought reform strategies that cult leaders use, and that's why a chapter of my book is called The Cult of Parenthood. They use the same kind of black-white, us-them thinking. This is the real family. This is the real reality. Everything else is dangerous and bad. You can only trust me. I'm the one who knows you. I'm the one who understands you. That's bad-mouthing the outside world. That's what the cult leaders do, right? Though they're all out to get us. You have to trust me. You have to listen to me. I'm the only one who cares, right? Okay. So one of the reasons why it's interesting to think about the cult analogy is that it's very helpful for the people who go through this to explain it to other people. Until we really get the word out there about parental alienation, the kids who go through this, it was very helpful for them to understand it as a cult. Now, I didn't tell them that, but when I ultimately sent each of the people I interviewed a copy of my book, and I dialogued with them afterwards, and they said, oh, now I have a way of talking about it, because everybody's heard of cults, and we know that adults join cults. So if an adult is willing to, shave their head and starve themselves and stand in an airport, it's probably a bad analogy. I don't know what cults do these days, but I still have that image of standing in the airport selling flowers for nickels so the guru could drive a Mercedes. I mean, if adults are willing and they're able to be manipulated into that situation, we can certainly understand how it happens to kids that they're willing to form an allegiance with a parent who's a real parent, not a parent substitute the way the cult leader is. So it's very helpful, and it's helpful for targeted parents to explain to other people what's going on. And it's helpful for thinking about recovery, because we know a little bit about how people leave cults, and we know about how people recover from cults. So for example, there's 3 ways that people generally leave a cult. They can walk out, so they can finally have the realization, this is nuts, what am I doing here? And they can leave. They can be cast out, where the cult leader evicts them from the cult, often as an example to the other people, to instill fear in the people who are left. Or they can be counseled out, exit programmed or deprogrammed or counseled, so that they can have their own understanding, oh yeah, maybe I don't want to do this. And so we can think about, well, how do we get kids out of parental alienation? Maybe there's these different paradigms that apply from cults to alienation. And it's helpful to think about alienation as a cult because, as it turns out, the long-term effects are really remarkably similar. And we know a fair amount about what happens to people who leave cults. If somebody's 18 and they go into a cult and they come out at 28, do you think they're like your regular 28-year-old? They're more like an 18-year-old, right? Their critical thinking's been stunted, their life skills have been stunted, they don't have the confidence, they haven't matured, they haven't developed the way somebody who's not in a cult would develop. So when we look at somebody who's come out of alienation, what they say about cults is leaving the cult is the beginning of recovery. And they have a whole lot of work to do because the cult leader is still in their heads. They still think, even though they've been out of a cult, that the cult leader can read their minds, they know what they're thinking, they're going to come after them. Well, it gives us a little bit of insight into how alienated kids can function. And even when they have the realization, we have to know that that's just the beginning of their recovery. Okay, so now I'm going to just touch on some of these long-term effects. So I interviewed these people and I said, what do you think this meant to you to have been in this experience? And I'm highlighting that because I didn't tease apart statistically what piece of this was exposure to the alienation strategies and which piece was due to the divorce. I asked them, what do you think it meant to you to be manipulated by mom to cut off dad, or manipulated by dad to cut off mom? And these are the kinds of things they talked about. They said, I hate myself. I'm a horrible, horrible person. So there was a price to pay for having the realization. And although they were all happy that they had the realization, they felt like they were truer to themselves and to the truth and the reality of their life, this was not an easy thing for them to realize, I broke my mother's heart. I had a stunted life for X number of years while I was alienated. And they felt very badly about themselves for what they did. And they felt badly that they were, that it happened to them. Like, how could I have been so stupid to believe dad about mom? And again, that's where the cults come in, because we can say to them, well, if it happens to an adult, if an adult can be manipulated to give up everything and cut off everybody, it's possible that it could happen to you. You were just a kid. A lot of them talked about being depressed. One woman said, I don't know what you call it, but I can't get out of bed in the morning. I'm so sad. I say, I call that depression. And I understand it as an inability to mourn the loss of the targeted parent. So not only did these kids get cut off from a parent, but they had no way to make sense of it. If you remember back to the alienating strategies and the symbolic communication being cut off, these kids couldn't talk about the parent. They couldn't make sense of, like, where did that parent go? Why am I not allowed to have a relationship with that person? So as an example, one of the people I interviewed said that when he was 7, he came home from school and there was a new man in the living room, somebody he hadn't seen before, and his mommy said to him, he was a 7-year-old boy, "This is your new daddy." And he said, "What happened to the man who used to be my father?" He already knew that he wasn't allowed to call that person daddy. And she said, "Oh, he was a bad man, and you don't have to deal with him anymore. Here's your new daddy," who, by the way, turned out to be an alcoholic, battering, abusive stepfather. And from that day forward, this boy had no words to use to talk about this father. And he could never make sense of it. And it wasn't until he was 40 and in rehab that his father, who had hired a private detective over the years, finally tracked him down and sent him a card, which he got, and showed him his 7-year-old birthday card that this dad had sent to him, that the mother had sent back to the father, "Go away, we don't want your cards." And the dad thankfully saved it and could give it to this 40-year-old man. And the 7-year-old boy in him could, begin to heal. But nothing can completely erase those years of loss. And so you can see where the depression comes in. Obviously, issues of trust. These people said, if I was fooled once, I believed my mother, I believed my father, and then they said, everything I thought was true is not true. So again, the realization comes at a great price for them. The people I talked to, they talked about high rates of divorce, drug abuse, they were just suffering, low achievement. Many of these people were not on a path towards self-sufficiency. And again, that goes back to the cult-like behaviors of the alienating parents. These are not parents who want to launch their children to be independent thinkers, self-sufficient, have a life of their own. They're undermining the kids' success in school. These are kids who didn't go to college or didn't make it in college. And then finally, the saddest one of all, half the people I interviewed who had kids had already lost their own kids to this. And so you can just see how it travels down the generations. The obvious pattern, although there were others, was a boy who has a narcissistic mother who turns this boy against the dad. This boy grows up. Who does he marry? A narcissistic woman. And then when they get divorced, what happens? She turns the kids against them. Right? There were other patterns, too. There was a woman who turned her daughter against the dad, and that daughter grew up, and she had kids, and that mother turned this girl's kids against her. And I think in the film that we saw earlier, there was a picture of the grandmother who was repeating this, right? Okay, I think this, again, is no surprise at this point. I believe that alienating parents probably have a personality disorder. I didn't interview them. I'm not a clinical psychologist. I'm not allowed to diagnose them. I can just give an educated guess that they're probably a type 2 personality disorder that's narcissistic, borderline, or antisocial. And the reason this makes sense, and it fits in with everything that the adults I was interviewing said to me, is that people with these kinds of personality disorders really can't comprehend that other people have an independent, separate experience. So these people cannot understand that the kids still might love and want a relationship with that parent. Okay. All right. I think this sort of says it all. Parental alienation is emotional abuse. That's not a law yet. And in fact, in New York State, in this state, there is no statute against psychological maltreatment or emotional abuse. So, and there certainly is no statute against parental alienation. But if you look at the primary definitions of psychological maltreatment or emotional abuse, you can see how parental alienation maps onto it. These strategies, the 17 strategies I talked about, lead children to feel worthless and unloved. The child comes to believe that the targeted parent doesn't love him or her, and then the child internalizes this bad parent. Oh, if dad is bad and dad's in me, then I must be bad, right? I'm no good. So that's all part of the emotional abuse. Okay, I'm going to I think I'm going to skip over some of my research. I have a whole body of research in psychological maltreatment and parental alienation. I'm just going to skip over it. I'm going to jump to the realization process. The people I interviewed identified 11 catalysts, because I asked them, when did you finally come to the realization? What allowed you to finally have such a massive rethinking of your whole childhood? And they identified 11, and I'm going to get to that. But as I mentioned, there's a huge price to pay. They were glad that they had a truth, but this was no easy thing. There's a lot of forces at work keeping them alienated. There's tremendous guilt over the treatment of the targeted parent, tremendous sadness over the loss of that parent. Nothing can make up that lost time. Multiple catalysts, that means there's no thing. Guess what, folks? There's no magic wand. I wish there was like one thing and we knew what it was and we could just make it happen. But some people talked about one thing making it happen for them. Some people talked about another. I don't know why something worked for one person, but it didn't work for another. For example, one of the catalysts was the death of the alienating parent. So some of them said, finally, when that parent died, I felt free to reach out to that other parent and think about maybe that parent really wasn't so bad. Another person said, when my mother died, and in this case the mother was the alienating parent, I picked up the mantle and I just went with it, and I took my father to court so that he wouldn't have any contact with the other children in the family, and she became the pseudo-alienating parent herself. So the same experience, the death of the alienating parent, had two completely different outcomes. That woman didn't have the realization until her brother became a targeted parent. Some of them achieved a life milestone. They had kids themselves, and they realized, I want my kid to have two parents. Maybe I should have had two parents. Some of them went into therapy. None of them went into therapy for this. In fact, one woman said to me, she went into therapy, and the therapist said to her, well, tell me about your parents' divorce. And she said, I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm one of the few people who's totally untouched by my parents' divorce. So she was clueless. Okay, some of them, there was an intervention of an extended family member, and I think you were making that point. We need to get more people to bear witness and speak the truth. Sometimes one woman talked about a boyfriend saying, I hear you telling me, but I think there might be more to this. Some of them saw the alienating parent treating the new spouse the same way that the parent treated the parent. And they're like, oh, maybe this is a pattern, maybe this is really something I need to look at. Some of them, it was becoming a parent themselves. Okay, now I'm going to talk about some advice, and then I'm going to talk about my children's book. All right, so for parents who still have contact, so your kids are mildly or moderately alienated, but they're not so severely alienated that you don't see them anymore. The main advice that I have is to not take the bait. What happens is your kid goes to spend time with the other parent and they come back and there's an accusation. Why did you steal my college money? I've heard 4-year-olds who don't even know what college is or money is. And they're like, why did you steal my college money? And it's a trap. Because what happens is the targeted parent ends up fighting with the kid. And what the kid remembers, so what they do is they'll go, no, here's the money. See, it's in the account. And they're waving it angrily at the kid. And what the kid remembers is the bad feeling. And so now this goes all the way back to what I was talking about in terms of bad-mouthing and the message. If the message that your kid is getting is that you're unsafe, unloving, and unavailable, you have one job as a targeted parent, and that's to be safe, be loving, and be available. Kids remember the feeling of the relationship, not what you say. So you might be able to show them the paper that has the college money funds right there, but if you do it in a way that doesn't feel safe, that's what they're going to remember. Don't take it personally. Well, that's an easy one, right? Right? I mean, your kids are treating you like you're garbage and you love them and your heart's broken. Don't take it personally. That's all I can say. Because then you end up doing the work of the alienating parent for them. You have to hold yourself to the highest possible standard. It's so unfair. Alienating parents get to bend the rules, they get to violate court orders, right? And you do one little thing, maybe it's not even wrong, and man, it comes right down on you. You know what? This isn't about fairness. You have to let go of that idea that you deserve fairness, because that's just irrelevant. This is totally unfair. But you have to, picture that there's a video camera and it's going to be shown to the judge. That's how you have to behave every single day. So even if you're convinced that your kid is not going to be there for that Sunday visit, you go and you knock on that door. Because the one time you don't go is the time that you're being videotaped and accused of, not caring. All right? Separate the message from the messenger, right? The message is, I hate you, you're garbage, I never want to see you again. And the messenger is your child. You have to visualize your child as like a puppet. And you can't tell your child this because it's very offensive, right? Nobody wants to hear you're just a puppet. But it helps you as a targeted parent to just keep thinking to yourself, that's just the words of my spouse, or it's just the words of the alienating parent. Somewhere inside all that ugliness is my child. And you can't hate your child. I think it's tempting in a way to devalue the alienated child because they're breaking your heart, right? And you don't have contact with them, or they're just making your life miserable. And so it's easy to sort of just say, well, fine, if you don't want a relationship with me, come find me when you're 18. And that can be very bad. The people that I interviewed said that was the hardest thing for them, was when they finally had the realization, but they didn't know if the targeted parent wanted to see them. All right? So number 5, use responses that avoid being too passive or too reactive. Targeted parents have to walk a very fine line. And the temptation is always to overreact or underreact, because you're either angry or depressed. If you're angry, it's because you're being accused of all sorts of nonsense, stealing the college money or whatever, and you just feel like you just want to explain, no, it's not that, right? And then you get all worked up, and maybe you'd even sound like Alec Baldwin on that voicemail, right? You don't want to do that. Or you become like a total doormat because you're just so depressed. And what happens either way is the kid goes, gee, Dad's right, Mom's a drag, right? Or, gee, Mom's right, Dad's always yelling at me all the time. This doesn't feel good. So you have to find creative strategies for reacting that don't involve fighting with your kid or just becoming depressed, okay? Try to have empathy for your child. They're a victim in this. I know they're behaving really badly, and it's hard to see them as a victim, but they're actually a victim of child abuse. I mean, if you believe it, if you believe your child's been manipulated to give up a relationship with you, a loving parent, you have to feel sorry for your kid. That doesn't mean you would say it to them, I pity you, child, but it means that it could help you maintain that loving stance towards your child. Number 6, that just goes back to it. What is the message? You have to think about it. What is my kid being told about me? Is it that I'm crazy? Is it that I'm angry? Is it that I'm dangerous? What is that message? And then be different. Show yourself. You can't say, I am too safe, because the kid's going to experience you as unsafe because you're yelling at them. You have to be safe, right? Always show up for pickups and drop-offs. Just constantly be there. I've talked to parents who say, I know my kid's not going to be there. Why should I show up? And you can see it's very hard to walk up to that door and knock on the door when you know your kid's not going to be produced. You have to really manage that. But one of the people I interviewed, she hid from the dad. Every Sunday he would show up, and there'd be a note on the door, go away, we're not home. The mother would put the note on the door. And the kid would stand behind the door giggling, smirking, and the door wouldn't open, and the dad never got to see his kid. So he said, this is according to the girl that I interviewed as a woman, that her dad just stopped coming one Sunday. And you could see how a dad could stop coming. I mean, what's the point? The door's not going to open. And I said to this woman, well, what was that like for you when your dad didn't knock on the door on a Sunday? She said, I was crushed. I was shocked. She couldn't really think that far into the future. So when she's saying, go away, I hate you, she didn't really mean go away forever. And she experienced his not coming to the door as a rejection. She thought he had rejected her. All right? Get lots of support. Oh, get a team of legal mental health professionals. Enough said about that. Get lots of support. Nobody should go through this alone. Document, document, document. You should take those 17 parental alienation strategies and try to show, is there objective documentation that the other parent is doing these strategies? Okay, this is a little bit of suggestions for parents who haven't seen their kids recently. This is sort of the hardest thing. Never give up hope. It was the thing that I heard over and over again from the people I interviewed. They didn't want that parent to go away. They didn't really mean it. They didn't want the end of that relationship. So you have to imagine, you know those Russian dolls, the doll inside the doll inside the doll, somewhere inside that, all those hard shells, somewhere inside there is your child who still loves you and needs you. And we know some of these kids are going to figure it out. We don't know which ones. We don't know which kid's going to figure out. So that's number 2, just never give up on your child, all right? And number 3, leave a trail of breadcrumbs. And that just goes back to the person who said to me, one of the people I interviewed, she had the realization process, she could talk about it all, and I said to her, so when did you connect with your father? And she said, oh, I haven't done that yet. And I said, why not? And she said, I'm afraid. I don't know if he wants to see me. So as the targeted parent, you feel like you've been rejected. But from the kid's point of view, if you pull back, they experience that as a rejection. And so often, so what I always recommend is you should have as much contact with your kid, sending a letter, an IM, a text message, as you would have if you weren't alienated. So if you have a 15-year-old, you would probably talk to that kid every day. So if they were at the other parent's house, you might have some contact. So you should be texting your child or IMing them every day. Unless your kid takes out a warrant and says, I'm going to arrest you if you text message me, I think that you should still be having contact. From the parent's point of view, to just send a little text message is like a crumb, right? And your image is, there's like a chain link fence and you're just pushing a little crumb through and it's probably being blown away in the wind. What's the point? It's just, you have like so much love and you have to boil it down to one text message, once, maybe a day, once a week. It just feels like nothing, right? Like, how could that have any meaning? But from the child's perspective, that crumb is the difference between knowing your parent loves you and not knowing. It's everything. So try to think about it that way. All right? Get lots of support. I already talked about that. And be creative. So, mix it up. Call them, email, IM, send a card, send a letter. Everything you do has to be giving them the message, I'm here, I love you, I want to have a relationship. Okay? This is just my little note to us. We need to do more of this kind of training. We need to train the attorneys, the judges, the custody evaluators. We really need to get everybody together to understand what's the difference between alienation and estrangement. We need to educate people about how bad this is for kids. And it's a battle, I have to tell you. It's very hard to, I'd be happy to train anybody anywhere, and it's hard to get to the legal professionals. All right, so now I have a couple minutes left. I want to talk about prevention is the key. So alienating parents, in my opinion, are hopeless causes. I have no fantasy that I'm going to change them. I believe you could say to an alienating parent, your kid's going to hate you in 10 years. You are ruining your kid. I don't think that would do it. Your kids won't talk to you. I don't think they'd believe you, right? Because it's a closed system. It's totally self-justifying. So I want to empower targeted parents. I want to educate them. But I really think the real traction to solving this problem is going to be getting to the kids before they become alienated. So I've written this book. That's the cover of it. I don't want to choose how middle school kids can avoid choosing one parent over the other. So originally the book was designed for targeted parents to give to their kids, or for a school counselor to give to a kid, or a therapist to read to a child. And then we got the idea that what really needs to happen is we could create a program for schools to run. I mean, a lot of schools run divorce programs for kids. There's a bunch of kids whose parents are divorced, and the school will run a program. So what I did was I created a program based on this book. And the premise is to teach kids critical thinking skills so they can step out of that conflict and resist the pressure to choose one parent over the other. So the question is, why is the school the right place? Well, for one thing, it's a neutral third-party setting. It doesn't automatically favor one parent or the other unless the parent teaches in the school or works in some way in the school setting. So the kid's more likely to listen to something about divorce if it's not coming from one parent or the other. It's safe for the kids. It's outside the influence. The person running this program gets to say what they want to the kids without the parents influencing it. It can normalize the experience because there's groups of kids together who presumably are being exposed to parental alienation strategies, and they can support each other. All right, so why should the school want to do this? Right? I know why I want the school to do it, but one of the things that I'm trying to do is figure out how to sell this program or market it or explain it to schools. So one thought is that the program teaches skills that can be generalized and applied to other settings. So the schools might not care whether a kid chooses one parent over the other, but they don't want the kids joining gangs or being unduly influenced by peers or dropping out. So if we're going to teach kids skills that they can apply to other situations, the school should be on board with that. The other point to make to the schools that if it's not treated, the alienation can create stress on the kids that can affect them academically. So again, we have to hit the schools where they live. They care about how these kids are doing academically. And then we can also make the point to the schools that a lot of parental alienation strategies get played out in the school setting, so they're already a party to this, right? So why not help them deal with it? So here are the premise of the program. The school does not have to believe or understand or care or know about parental alienation syndrome. The way that we talk about the program is divorce is a stressor for all kids. So we're not pointing the fingers. There's no good parents and bad parents here. There's no alienating parents and targeted parents. It's parents sometimes behave in a way that creates stress and feelings in kids that they have to choose. It's difficult for kids to sustain a divided loyalty. Let's try to help kids so that they don't choose one parent over the other. So we're normalizing this for the schools and we're explaining it to them on their own terms. So the people who created this program, myself and my colleagues, we believe and hope that alienation can be prevented if we can get to these kids while they're only mildly or maybe not even mildly alienated, and we can give them the tools. Hopefully we can prevent it from proceeding from mild to moderate to severe. We believe that it should be avoided, that we need to protect these kids. This is a form of emotional abuse. It does lead to very bad outcomes for kids. We believe that kids need permission and skills to resist the pressure. They need to know that it's okay. They don't have to give in to the pressure, and that we're going to help them learn how to say to a parent, I don't want to hear bad things about the other parent. All right? So we took the 17 parental alienation strategies that we identified in the research that I belabored not that long ago, right? The bad-mouthing, the limiting contact, limiting communication, interfering with symbolic communication. We took all of them and we put them into sort of kid-friendly terms and talked about situations that kids experience. And the program is designed to run as a 20-week, so there's 20 weekly sessions of small groups of children. We expect it to be run by an experienced facilitator. They don't have to be a therapist, just a school social worker, a school counselor. We took the 17 family situations. Each week is devoted to one situation, and each week we take a situation and then we teach the kids 4 approaches. What would you do if you were faced with this situation? All right, and it's a manualized curriculum. It's like a 100-page manual. You give it to somebody and they can run with the program, so they're not making it up on their own. I'm going to skip that. Okay, I'm going to skip that because we're coming to the end here. It's a structured program. There's a certain procedure that happens for each session. I'm going to jump to, okay, so here's some of the situations. You'll recognize them, but again, they're put in kid-friendly terms. One parent looks sad, angry, or hurt when you leave to be with the other parent. One parent asks you to spy on the other parent. One of your parents says mean or untrue things to you about the other parent. One parent allows you to choose whether to spend time with the other parent. One parent doesn't want you to have pictures of the other parent. One parent refers to the other parent by first name. You get it, right? These are the strategies. Okay. These are the kinds of situations that can create a psychological wedge between the child and the other parent. They create stress on children. They get played out in the schools. So for each of the 17 family situations, the book presents numerous examples to sort of make it live for the kids. So just as an example, for the spying situation, we spell it out for the kids. What if Dad asks you to see who Mom talks to on the phone? What if Mom asks you to look at Dad's mail for things about the money? Because the kids might say, oh no, Dad doesn't ask me to spy on Mom, because that sounds sort of bad. But when you give examples, it's like, oh yeah, well that happened. Or sure, that happens all the time. Then for each of the 17 family situations, the kids are given possible thoughts and feelings that they might have to get them to explore what their own thoughts and feelings are. So it might be worried. Is Dad doing something wrong that Mom should know about? Guilty. Is it wrong for me to spy? Because these are complicated situations that the kids are faced with. All right, so here's sort of the meat of the program. For each of the 17 situations, we teach the kids critical thinking skills. We teach them to consider their options. What should you do when this happens? One option is to spy, if you're being asked to spy. Listen to the bad things, keep secrets, refer to your parent by first name. That's an option. There's other options as well. And we want to give kids some choices and the freedom to know that they do have some choices. For each of the 17 situations, we teach them how to listen to their heart, to know their own truth. And then we teach them how to get support. So for critical thinking, what we do is we ask them through a series of interactive activities to think about, what do I believe? Why do I believe that? What's my evidence for believing that? Is there another point of view? What's the evidence for that point of view? Could I be mistaken? Could I be misinformed? Am I being pressured to believe something? I mean, imagine how enlightening this would be for a kid who's being alienated to be given permission to think about what they're being told and what the truth of it is. What would happen if I changed my mind? Am I free to think my own thoughts? But we don't just hand this to children. This is the process. There's activities that are designed to elicit these thoughts in the kids. So for considering options, we play out some scenarios. Well, what are the choices? What do I think of them? What would happen if I did this? What would happen if I did that? How can I appropriately and respectfully make a choice that allows me to maintain relationships with both of my parents? For listening to one's heart, we ask the kids to ask themselves, what do I know to be the truth of each of my parents? What are my core values? What kind of child do I want to be? What happens when I'm not true to myself? So if I'm asked to spy on somebody and I've decided I don't want to be a kid who spies, how does that feel? What kind of relationship do I want with my parents? And then in terms of getting support, the program teaches them how to access and maintain and build up their inner strength. We teach them what they say inside their heads affects how they feel. You know, it's standard cognitive behavioral therapy. The things we say affect our feelings. So we teach them positive self-talk. I'm a smart kid. I can deal with this. I have courage. And we teach them to reach out to trusted adults and friends. And if we can get to those trusted adults and help them bear witness and be truth speakers, then the kids have a chance of not being alienated. All right, I'm going to skip this. We're trying to get the program up and running. And the goal is to continue to expand the program, to refine it, and then ultimately to do a big study where we can determine whether this is an effective program at promoting critical thinking skills and helping kids resist the pressure. And then ultimately we want to go to scale. And I'm done. All right, thank you. so how much time for questions? And could somebody come up and point to the people? I find that very unnerving. There's too many hands, and anybody who wants to leave should just leave. I know it's late.
Excellent talk as usual.
Thank you.
About 12, 13 years ago, Richard Gardner, right here at Mount Sinai, some of you may remember that. He said he finds, as you mentioned, that fathers are becoming increasingly alienated. He wondered why. So the coffee break, I said to him, more fathers gaining custodial rights. But back at the coffee break, I said, David Lee, you just explained why.
So next time, catch me at the coffee break. Same thing.
Fathers are becoming more likely to be alienated. They have an opportunity. They get more custodial rights.
I'm kind of going through a parental alienation thing, obviously that's why I'm here. But I sort of feel like, this seems like sort of trying to erect a pup tent in a hurricane. This treatment.
Not good. You want something more in a hurricane? That's the...
Well, no, I mean, it just seems like, it's a very, very difficult task when you're trying to counteract the message from the other 23 hours in the day that they're getting at home. I'm wondering if you've considered maybe in extreme cases looking at this as some sort of residential thing, or just getting the kids out of that environment.
Right, there is one, Family Bridges, right? Right, I am certainly not saying I have the answer or the only answer. This is right. Thank you for helping me clarify that. He's calling on people, not me.
Some of the issues we're discussing with holding records, medical records, things like that, and information that sometimes can be very critical in another diagnosis, which can be disguised by PAS. And I warn that people don't ignore the possibility, for example, of Munchausen, where children are getting medicated, they can't get medical records to find that out. And they really don't want to over-interrogate their child because that's not good either, so how does one find out? It's something that needs a little bit more development too, because I kind of got caught in that trap for quite some time. And fortunately, I was able to circumvent that and prevent a lot of injury for younger son.
Well, I don't think Munchausen and PAS are mutually exclusive. In fact, one of the 40 people I interviewed, the mother was both an alienating parent and a Munchausen by proxy.
Yes.
Actually, I have a couple things. One, there's a couple people talking in the hybrid case you were mentioning, and in respect somebody else had mentioned, and they wanted to know with the hybrid case, I'd say that targeted parent might actually be mentally ill because of the abuse they took from the alienating parent, and that might be a reason for that targeted parent to be so mentally ill that was in the hybrid case. The other thing, a couple of people had asked about, well, how does one kid get alienated and another doesn't?
You mean in the same family or?
In the same family, why someone, self-esteem. A child that's got a high level of self-esteem has less likely of a chance to be affected by this because they believe in themselves and they can think more critically for themselves. In much like many of you were subjected to becoming target parents, you were more submissive, you were more laid back.
Well, those are working hypotheses that need to be tested. We don't know that.
I'm saying this is a hypothesis that maybe it has to do with the level of self-esteem why one child might end up more likely to be alienated than another. I'm saying it's an absolute, but it's a possibility.
Is there a question?
No, I said I had a couple things I was going to say, and then
I'd like to hear Dr. Baker.
That was it.
The question is very good. You wrote about adults, we're talking about children. Is it ever, when or if is it ever appropriate to bring up parent alienation to a child before they become the adult?
I was going to say people ask me that. What people ask me is, I have an adult alienated child, should I send them your book? And that's often a question, and I think yours is just an extension of that. And I have to go back to the point that you have to have the relationship first. If you're asking, can I say to my child, I think you're being overly influenced, or I'm wondering where that idea came from, I think if you do it in an empathic, loving, questioning, open way, but to say, you're the victim of parental alienation, obviously would not be helpful. So it's how you do it.
Question, concern, I'm a targeted parent, and about coping with the situation, had some things there. And one of the things that's been difficult to cope with is, how can someone be this evil to do this to their own child? And I've been reading and searching and looking for some kind of commonality. And the only thing I've found common that seems to match my case is that people that do this seem to have some disconnection in their early childhood with their fathers and not form a bond before they're 7 or 8 years old, which my ex-wife used to tell me she had no bond with her father until she was 12 and started playing the sport. And that's actually helped me because if I view the things that she's doing and I view her as a 4-year-old or 5-year-old girl doing these things with the power to do them, it matches. This is what I see, but this is the only commonality I found in all my reading. Is there any?
Well, I'm not sure there is one common, other than having a personality disorder. I think there's different motivations, and Gardner also wrote about this. Some people do this out of revenge. Some people do it out of fear. They can't tolerate being alone. Some people do it because they are so angry. They if their spouse leaves them, then they devalue that person, and then they can't understand why that kid would want to have a relationship with that person.
Empathy for their own kids. It seems
Or they can't comprehend that their children have separate experiences.
Maybe
Right.
it could help you to know that the child suffered more than you.
Yes.
well, that helps me cope with how a person has to do this to their kid.
This was a question.
Dr. Baker?
He's answering. I mean, he's calling on people.
Dr. Baker? For your programming, you've got a lot of it's mentioning about like kids that are going through divorce. I've been divorced for 12 years from my ex-husband. In the last 2 years, it's due to a high conflict custodial issue that we've got going on, and all this is like erupted. This program, would that work?
Oh, yeah, I didn't mean to say that it was in the first 6 months following the divorce. It's, we really leave it to the schools to determine who should be in the program. And
I'm sorry, one more thing, is with your research with the adult children, was there any ever mention, I know that you told me, we talk about like the ex-spouses that do the target, that do the alienating. Is there anything with like step-parents that fuel?
yeah, I'm sure plenty of people have seen that. I mean, who is an alienating parent going to marry? Somebody who's likely to join forces,
What
right?
I'm saying is like if the step-parent was actually the one that fuels it, and then the ex-spouse goes along with it for whatever motivational.
I didn't study that, but I hear people murmuring yes. So I think it's more worth looking at in future research. Same with the parents. I've seen many situations where the alienating parent will get divorced and then move in with his or her family of origin, and then they all sort of create this cocoon of alienation, right?
I just know if you had like specific results from the adult parent kids that.
No.
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you.
Gentlemen, in the back.
Yes, what's your suggestion for, my ex-wife is the alienating parent, and she has told doctors, schools, third parties not to communicate with me, that everything has to run through her to basically force me out of the picture, to the point where the school, not even return a call to me, they will return a call to her, and either exclude me or first to her, and then talk to me.
There are laws about how schools need to interact with parents, and you might need to get an attorney to write a letter to the school saying that you have a right to communicate, unless it's in the court order that you're forbidden to have communication. But, I understand that then could create bad feelings in the school. I mean, you might want to try talking to them and saying,
And doctors, what's the best thing for them?
I don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry. I don't have any specific advice except consult an attorney, find out what your legal rights are, and, start small and build, don't come on, like gangbusters right away because you're going to alienate them, but try to explain that you have a right and you want to exercise that right.
Yes, thank you. Doctor, you described PAS as being a type of emotional abuse, and you've talked about other states and how they've addressed it statutorily. Do you believe that there's an interrelationship between recognizing PAS for purposes of the mental health profession and the need to support shared parenting legislation? And if you do, would you support such legislation both nationally as well as on the state level?
I see a hot potato flying into my lap. Got it. What I will say is that my research does not support that 50-50 parenting protects you from alienation. I did one study where I surveyed targeted parents of severely alienated kids, and many of the people in my sample had shared parenting, even 50-50. But because the court orders are not enforced and there's no sanctions, as we all know, for parents who don't follow court orders, I don't know what it means. I think it's a wish. I'm not saying shared parenting is good or bad, but I'm saying I think it's a wish that that is the solution.
Well, yes,
I just want to ask you, I'm looking at this a little differently from a preventive model. And I'm thinking like this gentleman said that this ex-spouse, what has a history of her own history. And what I'm thinking about is how many couples going through a mediation divorce or legal or attorney divorce, separation divorce, how many could be receiving some form of counseling or therapy with some involvement in some way. Some states have it with the courts, some don't. But I'm thinking of couples that have come to me at the point where they're unhappy and miserable, maybe going toward a separation divorce, and the difference it could make. Because what's happening here is you're getting the aftermath, the consequence of rage, of pain, of humiliation, whatever it is, revenge. And it's sort of after the fact, and the child, of course, is a tool in this system. How much preventive work can be introduced?
I think it's a great idea. You know, I don't think it would really change the behavior of the alienating parent, but because I believe they have personality disorders. They're not going to listen. But it can't hurt. You know what? It certainly couldn't hurt, and I think it would help the targeted parents. They should know. You know, too often parents come to me and they say, "Oh, I had no idea that changing my kid's name and referring to the new spouse's mom was it's all part of a master plan to cut me out." And so, at a minimum, your idea would be to alert them as to what to look out for, and maybe it would help people not do it. You know, I think, Doug Darnall talks about 3 types of alienating parents. There's the naive, the obsessed, the naive, active, obsessed, and certainly there are people who might be stopped from doing it if they knew. So I applaud that. Go for it, definitely.
I'm going to allow one last question. I know a lot of people have more questions. I just want to say, anyone else, we did get a chance to select you for a question. Again, the box is in the back. Just write out your questions. I'll make sure that Dr. Baker provides you with the answers. So I'll take one last question. Okay, so you were back.
Yeah, it's kind of a two-part question. So since the alienated parent and of course since our health in this situation, I guess the best hope is what strategies or resources can we use for recovery both for the child, the PAS, and also for the targeted parent?
Recovery meaning for adult children who have had the realization?
Recovery for the student, yes.
Right.
Whether they're adult or they could be teenager, they could be middle-aged.
There's a chapter in my book about that. I haven't even read it in a while, and I don't remember all of it, and I'm sorry. But I did have at one point a lot of thoughts about how to do it. And, it basically had to do with giving them the space to forgive themselves for what they did, to understand, that they were just children. Sometimes it helps to show them a picture, have them bring in a picture of themselves when they were at that age when they became alienated, and they can see, how vulnerable they were, and they were just a little boy or a little girl, and, you know, they really aren't to blame for this. So, I mean, I think that's a big part of it. And then helping to reconcile with that targeted parent. Just like I said, having the realization that's just the beginning, right?
Please join me in thanking Dr. Well, tomorrow we'll continue with our program. I look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you, and good night.